Good morning, everybody, wherever you are around the world. Some of you, it might be very, very early, some of you later, but welcome. Welcome to our second event in a three-part online series on African and Black Diaspora Romance. So first of all, I should let you know that we're recording. This is a masterclass, so we'll be doing a lot of chatting. If you want, you can be on camera or off, but just in case you want to be on camera, remember that we are recording. And the chat is also, we keep the chat, also a copy of the chat. So I've been talking to you, but I didn't introduce myself. I am Julie Moody Freeman, the director for the Center for Black Diaspora, and I want to welcome you to this event. It's a three-part series that was co-organized by Eric Sellinger from the International Association for the Study of Popular Romance, Amy Burge from the Center for Contemporary Literature and Culture at the University of Birmingham, and myself from DePaul University Center for Black Diaspora. Yesterday, we held a roundtable on Black romance, past, present, and future in the US, a wonderful panel. Today's our masterclass with Dr. Margo Hendricks. Welcome, Dr. Hendricks, and I thank you for agreeing to hold this class. And the fourth event will be, the third one will be on Black British Romance, October 20th, 10:30 CST, 4:30 UK time. I'll drop the link in the chat very soon. And our last event will be in November, and that will be on Black Romance in Africa. I don't have the date yet for it, but as soon as we do, we'll get that to you. So again, thanks to Margo Hendricks. Thanks also to you who have zoomed in from all over the world to be with us. I'd like to acknowledge my staff at the Center for Black Diaspora for making all this possible. There are many different parts. So Joel Daly, the Assistant Director for the Center for Black Diaspora, Jessica Williams, and Jennifer Ogwumike, or student researchers and coordinators, and Catherine Douglas, who are she's our administrative assistant. So let me just introduce you to Margo Hendricks, who you're here for, and we'll get started. So Margo Hendricks writes romance as Elysabeth Grace. Her most recent novels appear in the Daughter of Saria series. She is the author of numerous academic publications on race, gender, and class in the Renaissance and early modern English literature. She has essays on Black romance forthcoming in Black Love Matters, edited by Jessica P. Pride. And I'll drop the link for that too, because that's forthcoming February 2022. And the Journal of Popular Romance Studies, I'll also drop the link for that journal. It's an online peer-reviewed journal. And Dr. Hendricks also has a forthcoming academic book titled Race and Romance, Coloring the Past. So I will pass you over to Dr. Hendricks.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Julie. It's 8:04 Pacific time. Any of you on the West Coast who are up with me, you guys rock. I want to first of all say that I have my earrings on, so I'm ready to begin my day. That is something my great-grandmother used to say. And in the morning, she'd get up, she'd put on her earrings, and for her, her day started. So we'll see about the cussing. Let me tell you a little bit about me before we just jump into the class. And I want to talk about the way in which I approach teaching. I haven't taught in a decade or longer, but I taught at the University of California, Santa Cruz. It is a PWI, for those of you who don't know. It's a predominantly white institution. I'm going to say at the time I was teaching there, maybe 2, 3, 4% of our student body, or less, were Black. I taught there retired, I taught Shakespeare. When the only individual to teach African-American women writers retired, I picked up that class later. So I have an eclectic background. With respect to romance, I taught my first romance class at San Jose State. And one of the things that I think about now, and I wrote about in an essay, was the whiteness of that syllabus. Because at the time I was not that familiar with Black romance, even though there were authors writing Black romance when I taught that course, I was not familiar with it. So the only two authors who were on that syllabus, Beverly Jenkins' Night Song, and Octavia Butler's Wild Seed. And people will argue with me about Octavia Butler's book being a romance, but one day I'm going to make an argument for it, because it is, in my opinion, an amazing Black paranormal romance. And I cannot encourage people enough to read that book if you want to see how well written Black paranormal romance can be. I want to start by talking about the idea of genre, and specifically the romance genre. First of all, it didn't start with Jane Austen. The romance genre has been around for at least a millennium. It began, and the prose romance began circa 5th century BC, and it began with what we would call an interracial romance. The heroine is white presenting Ethiopian. Her parents are Black Ethiopian. She ends up with the Greek. Actually, he's not really well, I'm gonna call him Greek. And they end up having an AGA after a lot of trials and tribulations. And she ends up becoming the heir to her royal family. That's the first romance. That's the first sort of racializing romance that we can reflect on that engages Blackness. So when people say to me that, oh, romance started with Jane Austen or Georgette Heyer or the Regency romance is the beginning, I laugh, because that means they haven't done their homework. So I'm going to say to you, anyone who wants to teach a romance class, you need to start from genre and not from the novel. Romance has been around for centuries. It was the form of popular fiction in the 16th, 17th, 18th century. So there is a history to the genre that I think might help us to destabilize a certain kind of notion about what constitutes a romance. That being said, the conventions and, if you like, the tropes are pretty much the same. Nuanced, but the same. In early modern, medieval and early modern romance, you had often one bed. They were forced marriages based on that. You had fake relationships. You had marriage of convenience. You had all kinds of obstacles being thrown in the way of the main characters. You had attention to characterization. Incredible use of metaphor. You had fascinating characterizations, some deeply problematic, some of them you would just gloss over because they are so familiar. One of the things that I think is important to remember in terms, and I'm going to be looking at my iPad because I have notes. One of the things that I think is important to think about with romance is the way in which certain kinds of hegemonic narratives, and by hegemonic, I mean sort of master narratives about what romance will represent, continue to plague us. And that, and I'm only gonna, lecture a little bit, so fire your questions when you're ready. And that hegemony is that romance is heterosexual, that romance enables a patriarchal structure, that romance is defined by the socioeconomic class of the main characters, that romance idealizes a certain standard of beauty based upon whatever currency is operating within European culture. And by European, I'm primarily talking about Western Europe, France, England, Italy, Spain, even Germany. But that there's a notion of what constitutes beauty and who possesses it and who doesn't. So that's been around for centuries, but it's also been contested in the romance genre. I write about an early modern author, Afroben, and some of you may know her from Orinoco, and her description of the main characters in Orinoco does an odd kind of recalibration of what constitutes beauty and handsomeness, because they're embodied in Black bodies, but you can see the Eurocentric rhetoric of beauty at work there. So the complexities of racializing romance has always been underscoring the writing of romance among authors. But romance authors also understand that they have incredible amounts of liberty in terms of how they construct that romance narrative. So what I'm going to do today is start off with pedagogy and then kind of move into the issue of scholarship. Although they're intersecting for me. I can't do one without the other. But I want to start off talking about how would we teach a Black romance class? And I'm going to be drinking coffee because I'm still kind of working on waking up. The first thing I'm going to say is if you're going to teach a Black romance class, the authors, the secondary materials should be authored by Black writers. There is scholarship out there. You will have to dig. And I'll give you a few resources. But there should be no white presence in a class in Black romance. I'm going to talk about why in a little bit. But that's the first order of business. The second order of business is there's a difference between Black romance, multicultural romance, and interracial romance. If you're going to teach a course on Black romance, the romance novels that you choose should focus on Black main characters, and it should focus on texts that represent them within Black culture. So we need to understand that there isn't a monolithic Black culture, that there are always layers, always complexity. There's no monolithic idea of Blackness. There's always layers, there's always complexity. But the author and the characters should identify as Black. The characters should self-identify as Black. I'm gonna sidetrack just a little bit because I wanna talk about, and I have this section titled Shades of Black Romance. And what I wrote is all the variables that should factor in both writing and teach Black romance. There are two things I want to stress. One, the issue of colorism. It's a conversation that it is a difficult conversation. It is a conversation that is taking place privately and publicly within African diasporic peoples, because we come in all shades. We have white presenting Black people. We have Black people who obviously are Black. I mean, literally are Black. So we need to recognize that there is no universal color in Blackness. There are colors in Blackness. I think we need to talk about, and we can maybe come back to this in Q&A, we need to talk about how a non-Black person grapples with that particular issue if they're not steeped in the discourse, if they're not steeped in the community where these issues are constantly being engaged and grappled with, etc. So be aware of it. If you're not familiar with it, learn. And please don't jump out as an expert to your class or to anyone if you don't have both the cultural context and a deep understanding of how colorism functions within the Black community. One book will not make you an expert. Second, I want to talk a little bit about intersectionality. First, I'm going to say, go back and read Kimberly Crenshaw's writings on intersectionality. It tells you so much about how you should be thinking about everyone's lives, not just Black people, but everyone's life. But I do think it's critical for you to understand how intersectionality functions within the space of Black culture and in the subjectivities of Black peoples, regardless of where they reside on this planet. Intersectionality insists upon recognizing the intersectional relationship between gender, class, racism/race, sexuality, and I'm going to add immigrant status, because we're a different world right now than the world in which Dr. Crenshaw first began to conceptualize the notion of intersectionality. So that when you're thinking about Black romance, please, 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 Harlequin's, Desire, Kamani, whatever, aren't the only Black romances out in the world. You need to read independent Black authors who will often give you a perspective of Black romance that traditional publishing won't recognize. We tend to think that aspirationally, Black people are seeking to reach a specific class, either upper middle class, wealthy, or whatever. But Black people operate on all class levels, and Black love operates on all class levels. One of the most interesting, one of my favorite writers is Zuri Day, and especially her early writings where she has a working class or a blue collar class series that deals with Black love. And it is so funny and so loving and so caring and non-toxic representations of masculinity. They are beautifully done. She represents strong Black women, strong Black men. She represents loving Black men, loving Black women. She embraces the gamut, okay? So I want to say, if you are going to teach Black romance, you need to step away from traditional publishing because they don't do it right all the time. Because they write to formula. They believe they know what will sell and what will sell in Black romance and to Black readers. And I suspect increasingly to non-Black readers is not within the scope of traditional publishing's radar. On colorism, that's a whole nother class. Not every Black person wants to be white. I need to put that out there. I'm gonna speak for myself, and I probably can speak for at least, I'm gonna say about 98% of Black people I know. we don't want to be white. When we look at white people, we have a great deal of pity at times for your lives. Largely because if you look at your history, it's like you've never been set. And I'm using the you in a universal way, so please don't take this personally. It's like you, in quotes, aren't satisfied with a very complex history that indigenous peoples within the territory, the geographical space where you can claim your ancestry have done. You will erase that and appropriate from others. One day, white folks are going to actually take a look at where they came from and understand that there is a richness there that they need to explore without the politics of shame, without the politics of appropriation. So when you're thinking about teaching a Black romance class, start from the presumption that the authors have given you a world of Black people who embrace, engage their Blackness, even if along the way they had to face obstacles based upon how society deemed, responded to, engaged that Blackness. Because that's what Black romance does. The last thing I want to suggest when you're teaching a Black romance class, and I think this, I'm gonna say this about romance in general. Can we please stop calling it fantasy? It's fiction. And if you're gonna call Black romance fantasy, then I also want you to call historical fictions fantasy, because it's all constructed. There's no real there. And the opposition of fantasy versus reality or realism versus fantasy, okay, here I go, it's bullshit. And you can quote me on that one. We need to stop playing that particular game. I don't make distinctions when I talk about romance as if it were fiction, as if it weren't literary. So I'm going to say, start from that presumption, and you will begin to unpack for your students, your audience. If you're writing this, you will begin to unpack this notion of romance as a literary outsider, as a literary other. It is not. It is the original literary form. And I want you to, I want y'all to say amen on that one out in the world, because it is. And I think it's important for you when you're teaching and writing about this, is to start at the beginning, which is why, even if it's just a short, simple, declarative statement, romance has been around longer than the idea of literature has been around. Why romance gets gendered is a different story. Why romance gets marginalized, you can blame the academy. But romance has been around forever. It has been celebrated forever. It has been defended, it has been critiqued. It has been critiqued, not because it's fantasy, but because it's not history for a long period of time. So when you're thinking about teaching any romance class, let's abolish the term fantasy. And when you're doing it with Black romance, please don't use the term fantasy, because what you're building into the ideological narrative that your students or readers will walk away from your class, your essay with, is the idea that Black romance is a fantasy, and it's not. That's what I have to say. All right. On that one. My other point about teaching, and this is all even before you create your reading list, and think about the questions you're going to ask and engage it. is don't engage in comparative analysis unless it's Black-centered. In other words, don't compare Black romance authors' fiction with non-Black romance authors' fiction, because the de facto measure, whether you intend it or not, is going to be whiteness. That is the history of romance scholarship. That is the history of the approach to romance within the publishing industry. That is the approach to romance among a large percentage of readership. So if you want to begin to disrupt that particular narrative, don't engage in the comparative analysis if you're teaching a Black romance class. If you are teaching a traditional romance, I'm gonna go back and forth, okay, just on this one. If you're teaching a romance class, then it ought to be comparative. And in my opinion, there ought to be parameters to that comparative structure. And again, these are things that we can talk about. But I just believe it's important that if you're going to teach Black romance, if you're going to teach Latinx romance, if you're going to teach Asian romance, if you're going to teach Native romance, you need to remember that descriptor: Black, Asian, Latinx, Native, okay? I'd love to see someone say, I'm teaching white romance. I probably would at this stage in my career. I would teach a white romance class. Because then students, I might have to write this up. Okay, I am gonna create a blog with all this stuff in there and explore the chaos that's in my mind. But that class would center whiteness rather than decenter whiteness. And it's sad that we have to center Blackness, center Latinx, center Asianness, center Nativeness in order to mark the parameters for thinking about a community's engagement with romance. But until we reach a place where we can do that, if you're teaching a Black romance class, let's not make it comparative. I have the perfect class in my mind that would be comparative. And it would start, of course, with Beverly Jenkins, include Sarah McLean, include Lisa Klepis, and include Vanessa Riley. And those would be the 4 people that I would teach. It would be a historical romance class. But I wouldn't teach it as a Black romance class, even though they're Black authors there. It is a comparative course. So if you're gonna do something like that, and you can ask me later why I chose those individuals, but that's how I want you to begin to think about the way in which you might teach a romance class, comparatively or in terms of a specific cultural context. As I said, if you start with the genre, because that destabilizes exactly the kind of bracketing that often goes on. So teach the genre. Just generically, what is romance? What does it look like? What does it posit? What can we expect in it if we're going to read it? What are we looking for? Teach it as a literary text. Yeah, Eric. Next, teach the literary first before you jump into the cultural. By doing that, you set up expectations for your audience, whether it's a student or an essay reader, or even just someone in conversation. I'm writing a contemporary Black romance. I've written a contemporary Black romance. In that one, it was a marriage of convenience type and secret baby. And I know some people don't like secret babies, but there was a reason for the secret baby in there because of Shakespeare. Because Shakespeare has a secret baby in that book. And so there was some mirroring going on. But think about not just the romance tropes. In fact, I would think about tropes generally. What is the function of a trope? What does it do to get us through the romance narrative? How does it work? I'm going to be going back and forth to, my base of operation. In early modern romance, one of the favorite tropes was the wandering maiden. She was virginal. She was often either completely naked or partially naked. She was put upon by marauders, pirates, the enemy, whatever. And they were stunned by her incredible beauty. So of course they didn't assault her. But that vulnerability moved them to pity, and so they aided her quest. Many times they aided her to her beloved. So think about what tropes are operative in a romance that may not be one bed, fake relationships, friends to enemies, friends to lovers, enemies to lovers, marriage of convenience, any of that. Think about those other tropes that are at work there. All right. And then move to the tropes that shape the publishing industry now. Okay. The ones I've just named, because those are subsets of, I'm going to call a trope industry that's been around for millennia. Think about the use of metaphors, the language. I'm going to be throwing out text, okay? I am reading Katrina Jackson's, one of her most recent books called Layover. And oh my God, exquisite, absolutely exquisite prose. And I'm sitting there as a literary person, scholar, whatever you want to call me, figuring out how this metaphor is working and following it to its end. Teach your readers, your audience, your students, whomever, how to follow a metaphor to its end, because it is with the metaphor that we begin the idea of trope. So think about all of that stuff that goes into literary analysis that we engage in de facto when we're reading. We just don't put that label on it. Even if you're reading for pleasure, all that stuff is working in your mind because it's shaping how you're going to follow this story. So I want you to think about teaching literary first and include the issue of tropes and the narrative structure, first point of view, first person, second person, third person, omniscient, dual POV, alternating POV, whatever it is that goes on, teach that as a kind of methodology for reading romance before you get to the larger questions of culture and history, politics, economics, theology, whatever, okay? All that feeds how the storyline moves. So, need coffee. Think about the ways in which you can destabilize expectations when people come to romance in general and Black romance in particular. I'm gonna take like a second to see if there are any questions in the chat, because I see lots of comments, but I'm seeing no questions. Okay, so I'm just gonna continue. If I see a question, I'm gonna stop and attempt to incorporate it into whatever I have to say. This is how I teach. My brain is, okay, if you don't know Blazing Saddles, you should, but there's this absolutely fantastic moment when Hedley Lamar says, my brain is swirling with transient nodes of thought. That's me right now, thinking about
Dr. Hendricks?
romance. Yes.
Dr. Hendricks, Jania has a question in the chat.
Okay. Did you copy it?
I can read it for you. It says, wondering how you'd go about introducing, for example, Indigo by Beverly Jenkins.
Okay. Oh, you just spoke to my little heart. Thank you. It's not disjointed. I wouldn't talk about the history first. I talk about it second, and that's the next point I was going to turn to. And that you mentioned Indigo, and if you don't know by now, that woman walked on water when she wrote that book for me. Okay, there is no Beverly Jenkins book that I've read more times than Indigo. Galen is the model for every one of my romance heroes. I don't care what color they may be. I don't care how tall they may be. I don't care how old they are. Galen Vachon is the man. Okay, so now I can move on. Again, I think from the standpoint of teaching a Black romance class, or any romance class that would include, okay, I was going to make an exception. I don't think I will. I would not begin with the history. And let me tell you why. There's a way in which, if you read the prologue of Indigo, you're devastated. And you're always going to kind of carry that prologue linked to that history with you and not focus on the literariness of that text, but focus on the historical context of that text and let that shape the way in which you, yes, I'll tell you what I'm saying yes to in a minute. The context for that one. Indigo is about Galen and Hester. It is not about Hester's parents, okay? If you actually think, okay, I've read all of Ms. Jenkins' historicals. You know, I'm gonna start calling her Dr. Jenkins because, like, she may not have a PhD, but that woman has written a master dissertation in how to write historical romance, okay? She ain't playing. So Dr. Jenkins, if you read virtually all of her romances, they do not take place during the actual Civil War. They either are at the beginning or at the end. There's a reason, I would argue, and she and I probably need to have this conversation because I may be just talking out of the side of my mouth. But I think there's a reason. And the reason is, in the Black Romance podcast, she noted that she wasn't going to write Black trauma porn. And her historical research, her historical context is that. It is the setting. It is not the love. It is not the Black romance. And if you read her romances, you will see that she constructs communities where white supremacy is outside and intrudes because, I'm sorry, however people want to look at it, white supremacy across the globe intrudes on non-white lives every day, every day. Some days are worse than others. So I think, I'm not gonna put words in her mouth, but I think I would be okay making an argument for us to see these texts as literary texts first, and then getting into the storyline second. Because there's no way you can teach Indigo without engaging the narrative that's woven into the love story. But if you actually look at Indigo, it's the love story that is like 90% of that text. It is not enslavement. It is not the brutality of white supremacy. It is not a discourse on the Fugitive Slave Act. It is about a Black romance, the construction of a Black community, people falling in love in different ways, okay? So I'm gonna say, I would start by teaching it as a literary text. And in my African American lit class, the one that I was able to teach, and it was on African American women, I taught every single text as a literary text. Because I taught for long, okay, here comes the F word. I am fucking tired of our literary texts being taught as if they are non-literary. Okay, I really am. Now, sometime I'm gonna use the F-bomb today. I really, really am. Do you know how much attention authors pay? I'm off the track a little bit, but I'm gonna preach. How much attention Black authors pay to literariness in their writing, and the use of metaphors in terms of story building, in terms of getting inside their characters' heads, in terms of thinking about what pushes them, what strengths they have, what weaknesses they have, what obstacles they have to overcome, what resources they have available to them to overcome those. And this is literature, period, not just this. Every literary text offers that template. Why is it we default, all right, to basically representing Black lives as Black trauma porn in our literary texts? Romance refuses to do that. And I think that's why people call it a fantasy. Black romance refuses to do that. So, okay, that was a very long, digressive answer to that question. But I hope you understand my point. Because I just think that flipping the switch a little bit, turning things a little bit upside down, is a way to destabilize the presumption of non-literariness of Black romance, of romance, period. I just really do. And I actually said that. I think, honestly, we need to be honest. Okay, so I wrote a historical paranormal, and it's set in the 16th century, my area of expertise. And a reader said they couldn't read I think they only read about 25%, or even less. Couldn't finish the book because of two things. One, they aren't into religion. They aren't into Christianity. All right. If they read the book in whole, they'd recognize there was very little Christian about that book. And two, they were pissed off because the main male character is a pirate And it's set in the 16th century at the beginning of the transatlantic slave trade, and he's attacking Spanish, and he makes remarks that would have been commonplace about what happens to captured women, whether they were enslaved or not. Okay. And so the person couldn't read it for that reason. And I kind of agonized over whether I should go back and revise it and change it. And then I went, no, because if the person had actually read that book and then read book two would have slapped them in the face and said, this is what you were looking for and you got it, all right? But you have to be willing to recognize that for some people, they want the trauma porn. And if you don't give it to them in the way that they want it, they're gonna run away, or they don't want trauma porn. And if you touch on it, they're gonna run away. You as an author, you as a reader, you as a scholar, you as a teacher aren't gonna please everyone. That was my 40-year-old, I'm not gonna tell you how old I am unless you ask. That was my 40-year-old self talking to my 40-year-old self when I got my first academic job. Okay. And I've kind of lived with that mantra. I'm not writing to please everyone. I'm not teaching to please everyone. But if you walk away with something that you can use, awesome. So don't teach trauma porn. Don't teach Black trauma porn, which means you don't spend 3 weeks talking about enslavement with respect to indigo, and 2 days on the love that grows between Hester and Galen Michelle. Just don't do that. It's the love story that's at the heart of that book. And it's not Hester's parents' love story, even though it's love story. The romance is Hester and Galen. The romance is not her parents. They had love. Okay. I'm not saying you should talk about it because it's a powerful set. It's a powerful letter. It's just like every time I read it, I'm like, damn. But then I move on, and I watch Galen woo his beloved, those purple feet and those purple hands. And when I get to the Song of Solomon in church, I'm like, amen. Okay. Yes, it is like, if you haven't read Indigo, you really need to, because Galen gives a master class in not only how to claim the woman he loves, but how to let people know that he's claiming the woman he loves. And he is alpha, so, you know, he is seriously not beta. Yes.
Dr. Hendricks, someone has asked a question, and
Okay.
that is, what pros and cons do you see in teaching a course entitled Black Romance versus African American or Black Fiction, with the latter only consisting of Black romance novels? The person says, my college has a course titled the latter, and I might be able to offer, but teaching one titled Black Romance may take a few years to actually be approved by my curriculum red tape. So what are the pros and cons do you see in teaching a course titled Black Romance versus African American or Black Fiction?
Okay, that's a fabulous question. Rule number one, pay attention to your institution. I would teach Black fiction and only teach Black romance. There are always ways around, unless they have to approve your reading list. You can get away with whatever you want to do. There are, and if they get, you know, really specific about it, and Can I get the, let's see, do I want to, no, not yet. I would distinguish between African American fiction and Black. Did you say Black fiction? Okay.
Yeah, it's
okay.
It says
Black romance.
What are the?
No, I got the question. I'm trying to remember the labels.
Okay, it's Black fiction. I mean, titled Black Romance versus African American or Black fiction.
Okay. I would not teach a Black romance class under African American fiction. I would include Black romances within that. I would teach, if I had to battle, I would teach Black fiction and I would teach Black romance under that heading. I taught a class, I taught at an institution, both of my institutions, both of them were public. One was much more diverse. And I had freedom to do whatever class I wanted. So when I taught my romance class, it was titled Romance Literature. When I taught my African American women's class, which had half Black women romance authors on there, it was including historical. That was the title. Be attentive to your institutional constraints. And if they don't hassle about your reading syllabus, if they don't nitpick your reading syllabus, whatever title you want to use it as, I'm okay with it. Except I would suggest not using African American fiction, because there, I think you need to represent the diversity of African American literature. I'm sorry, I said fiction, but literature. But Black fiction, hey, slip that romance in there. There's nothing precluding. So I think it's up to you. It's up to your institution. It's up to you, that battle you want to fight. I honestly think I would do Black romance fiction as opposed to just Black romance, claiming that fictional category is so important. So that's how I would teach it in terms of my academic freedom to teach what I want. I hope that answered your question. It's kind of, I had freedoms that, and I still do if I wanted to go back and teach at my institution, that other people don't, because your courses can be very prescribed. One way to check that prescription is to begin to increase the number of texts, romance texts that you want onto your reading list, okay? So if you're teaching women's fiction, I think half of that should be romance. And the other half can be anything you want. I think if you're teaching ethnic fiction, I think half of it should be romance. And then whatever you want. That's how you change the institutional practice of denigrating the romance genre, period. It's also how we wrest the romance genre from the early modernists and the medievalists who think they got a lock on it, and then poo-poo anything that goes past 1700. I think that's how we begin to wrest romance from the prescription of it being outside of literariness. So that's what I did. Y'all just keep them questions going, because eventually you're gonna have me saying everything that I wrote down that I wanted to say. can we talk a little bit? You know what? This is actually a good segue into, so first of all, make sure you have water, make sure you have food, make sure you do a little stretch, a little dance, a little wiggle in your chairs, whatever, because, you know, I'm here, we got 2 hours, we can stay the whole time, we can leave whenever you're tired of hearing me blather. We can have conversations. I will speak my mind, and hopefully I'll give you something to walk away with. As you can see, I talk with my hands. This is me actually teaching, just in case you were wondering. Can we talk a little bit about retraining our readers, which I think is important to the question of how we label Black romance or teaching romance within an educational setting, but also it has long-term issues for romance, for the romance community and romance publishing in general. Katrina Jackson said in the Black Roundtable session yesterday that readers need to acquire literacy into kind of what Black romance is doing. And mentally, I was doing gymnastics in my head, singing, yes, sister, yes. And then after I came down to earth, I realized, how do we do that? How do we teach Black literacy? I am probably, I may not be the best person to map out an idea or a template, but maybe as we discuss this and think through it, we can come up with something. I think the first check mark I would put is abolish language terminology like relate, identify with, empathize with, sympathize with, understand. The question is, can we open up the call and just talk? I think it would support her in a conversation. It gets unwieldy. Maybe we can do that in about 10 minutes and then we'll shut it down again, because we have 36 people in the room, and if all 36 people are trying to talk, we can descend into my favorite space of chaos. So let me put this out here, and then maybe we can open up and talk about a question of Black literacy. So let me give you my checkpoints, and we'll come back to this particular question, and I'll talk to Julie and the center staff about how we can achieve this and work it. So ridding ourselves of this notion that somehow we have to relate, identify, be sensitive to, etc., especially when you're teaching a room full of white students, or you're talking to white readers, or you're engaging non-Black readers. Second point, avoid what I call racial tourism. okay? That is, it's similar to ecotourism. You go off to, one of people's favorite ecotourist place is Central America and South America, into the jungles. We go on these little tours, we zip drive, we see the beauty, we go home, and we assume that we haven't left a footprint, okay? But we have, because we go home and we write about that experience. And we write it through that white lens. Whether we're white or not, okay? Because you've done tourism, you haven't lived it. So I'm gonna call for, and Eric, I'll write it up, a kind of understanding of the way in which reading Black romance, reading any kind of non-white romance, even reading white romance of the past, can be a kind of racial tourism. So I want to put that on there. I want to put on there the question of language. Okay. Not all white people talk the same. So why should readers expect all Black people to talk the same? Why should any reader expect a culture's different groupings to talk the same? Why don't we understand that there's regionalism in linguistic dialect? Why don't we understand that there is this thing called dialects, right? So I would add that to thinking about what it means to acquire readerly literacy in terms of Black romance. Think about the language that we as Black people bring to our reading and writing of romance. I'm becoming more sensitive to my cis-hetness. I have to train myself, I have to remind myself that not everyone shares the pronouns that I use. I have to train myself to even think about pronouns. That's how cis-het I truly am. Never thought about pronouns. It makes no difference that politically, I'll stand for anyone who's queer, but I've never truly thought about the language that inhabits my brain as a kind of automatic default. I've never thought about the fact that in my family, we code switch constantly. And when I'm with my family, I code switch. When I'm out in public, this is what you see. Which makes some people, go, how long did it take you to acquire that speech? All my life. Because it is one of our dialects. So I think there needs to be a conversation about how you engage what goes on within a Black romance in terms of dialects, and that's plural. And then not everybody's going to get it, and that's okay. And not every book is for every reader. And you need to be aware of that. But that doesn't mean you should exclude. Simply, you don't understand the variations in linguistic proficiency being represented in that text. How do you engage Black queerness in romance? If you're going to teach a Black queer romance, or any queer romance, that misrepresents the amazing diversity, resilience, beauty of Black queerness, solely to depict queer Black trauma porn, don't teach this class. Okay, just don't. It's problematic. Okay, do we want to kind of open it out for people to maybe take like a few seconds to throw something out there, comment, references? We have time, and we can open up at the end if you like to just general conversation. I'm happy to do it, but I'm also a teacher first and foremost. So I know that there are some people sitting there, I got something to say. You made me think about this, and they need to get it out. So I'm gonna, I embrace chaos. That's all I gotta say. So what I need. Okay, so you guys breathe and stuff. I have something that I think will help. Let me open this. Okay, and then let me share my screen with y'all. Okay, all right, oh, just, that's fine.
Hold on.
All right, yeah, whatever. Okay, and we can just like make this available to anyone, but this is really me thinking what I would do if I'm designing a class to teach right now. And that's sort of how I approach this. So this is an example. It's not written in stone. This is the class that I would teach, okay? First of all, my primary text, I taught a quarter system, which was 10 weeks. So what I did was to have texts that worked for 10 weeks. If you look at these texts, they are Black authored, and they deal with Black romance. All right. Now, in case you forgot, I am reading it because I've just been introduced to it. So I won't be talking about it specifically. And I'm also just reading layover and haven't finished it. But for class, I would have finished both of them. And so I'd be able to talk about them coherently. But what I did was to try to give my students a sense of range, starting with historical, ending with erotic, because it's going to take me a minute to get them to the erotic. All right. And what I also like about Tasha Harrison's A Taste of Her Own Medicine is that it's really down home, it's Southern, it's not urban in the way that we've come to expect. And so, and there's a lot of herbal stuff in there. It's just really good. So I would start with the historicals, and I would contextualize both those novels from the standpoint, again, the class would open with the genre, and then what a historical romance does, and how these two engage very differently. Black American, or if you put Black American history at certain critical moments of political activism, civil rights, migration, right? And Black love. Sweet Heat, the contemporaries, is a working class Black romance. And I love it. You know, they're both chefs, they're both starting their own business, both coming out of, you know, working class environments. I believe it's set in LA. It's been a while since I read it. but it's set in LA, and it's a contest for the female main character to get her own food truck. So it's wonderful. Mixed Emotions is a romantic comedy. And so there's stuff going on there that would allow me to talk about the subgenre of contemporary romantic comedy. So if you actually think about the order of this reading list, it's subgenres, okay? Historical is a subgenre of romance. Contemporary is the subgenre. Layover, oh my God, I could spend an entire month talking about the prose in that one. And I haven't started the second book, and I've already been told that if I wept with this one, I'm gonna weep with the other. But the other issue is it took me home in a particular way, because when I graduated high school, I moved to Oakland. And so there, the mantle of home settled there. It was taking you, but the prose is just exquisite. It's difficult to find paranormal romance, paranormal Black romance, because people have kind of moved away from it. I'm hoping at some point to shift that, and there is a shift that is becoming, but you have to look among indie Black romance authors to find it. Because everybody was told by traditional publishing paranormal romances are passe, although now they're making a comeback. Nothing ever goes out of fashion. But I like Awaken the Dragon because it bridges Black African, a Black African female main character with a Black American male main character, and he's a shifter, and she's Black Rebecca, a goddess, a witch. And so if you haven't read Awaken the Dragon, it's wonderful. Wicked is on there. It could also go on the erotic list. It deals with 3 Black witches and 3 or 4 Black witches. And it's a lovely book to read. So this would be my reading list, because for me, thinking about Black romance in terms of subgenres, it's a way for me to show the range and yet keep it very centered on a Black gaze, both from a standpoint of the characters and the standpoint of the author. Secondary readings, that was kind of hard because I didn't spend a lot of time deep diving into African American literature, Black fiction, or anything to see what people do. I really just wanted to say, if you don't have romance in the title, I'm not gonna bother. So I kind of went through and focused on the romance in the title. I'm gonna give a plug for the Black Romance special issue that's coming up. Every essay is written by a Black academic. 3 of us are also Black romance authors who have written Black romance. And it's just great. And the transcriptions of the Black Romance podcast, interviews with the amazing romance authors are included in there. For those of you who need a refresher on intersectionality, I've included Kimberly Crenshaw's Mapping the Margins because it's readily available. But if you have access to any of her writings where she lays out the concept of intersectionality, and you need to think about it, this is a good place to go. It's also, I think, useful for thinking about violence against women of color that often get articulated in non-Black romance text, as well as a way of grappling with representations of sexual assault and violence against women of color, and specifically Black women, that may stand in a romance novel. My contemporary deals with sexual abuse, I mean, not sexual abuse, but physical abuse, okay, by an ex. And it's something that I think we need to recognize as a place of a place we need to witness, but we don't need to make it traumatic. But we do need to grapple with it, because let's not pretend, okay, I'm gonna drop the F word. This fucking world has it out for us as Black women, as women of color, as Black women who are resisting interpolation into a patriarchal system that says the patriarchy owns our bodies. So I think we really need to grapple with the ways in which romance can aid and abet that fight. We need to stop listening to these nice white ladies who say, we just want it to be sweet and we want the fantasy, okay? Romance is more than that. And then the rest are essays that I think kind of introduce you to different ways of thinking about Black romance, African American romance. There's some historical text on there. I like Ronald Hall's discussion of the globalization of light-skinned colorism, because he talks about colorism. And I may not agree wholly with his argument in some places, but I find it very useful to think about. If you want to talk about colorism, there are other things out there. I didn't include anything on color passing or racial passing, even though I write about it, because again, I want to center or decenter whiteness in terms of thinking about this. Jennifer Morgan's essay on law, race, and reproduction in colonial slavery is just brilliant. And I think people should just read it, period. And then I included Sammy Shock's Happily Ever After for Whom, Blackness and Disability, because disability is something that we also need to talk about. And I'm a little slow to everything because I've been around forever, but it's like, here's our opportunity with a class to do what a lot of people on Twitter are saying we should do, we ought to do, we need to do within the larger romance community, within the dialogue, within the discourse, within our pedagogies. So that's yours for the taking. If you want a kind of starting place, but it's not inscribed in stone. Okay, so I'm gonna see if there are any, no, okay, we're good. Yeah, what time is it? Okay, so I have to do an hour ahead because it's 10:30. What is it? No, it's 11:30. Okay, scholarship. Everything I just said about pedagogy goes triple for scholarship. Okay. I want us to decenter whiteness in our scholarly writing. I want us to ask why, when we engage in analyses of Black romance, we privilege certain white-centric frames of reference? Why is it that what becomes important is the binarism of Black and white and okay, I'll answer the where can you find me in a minute. The binarism of Black and white, and think about what does it mean to just talk about Blackness? Okay. What does it mean to think about how the romance engages a community, speaks to that community, represents that community, or let me rephrase that, represents an aspect of that community, because we cannot represent the whole of the Black community because it is incredibly, and I'm going to only use this word once, diverse, because I'm not a fan of diverse. We probably should talk about Black communities, because even within a specific regional Black community, there are other communities that have work. There's a queer community, there's a disabled community, there's socioeconomic communities. So I honestly think the most important thing in your scholarship is to leave aside all of the training that you have, either deliberately or either explicitly or implicitly, about what you expect to see in the representation of Blackness and Black communities, and what you're actually seeing. And that's a hard thing to do. If you're a feminist and you're not well read in Black feminism, you're going to have a problem and you're going to get critiqued. Because there's no universal feminism, just as there's no universal Black feminism. And Black feminists tend to recognize that. And they'll speak from a position of Black women's subjectivities rather than Black women's subjectivity. So in my humble opinion, we need to think in terms of subjectivities. I think the most important question, and then I'm going to shut up and we can talk, about writing about Black romance from a scholarly perspective, and we should do it, is to let the romance tell us what to say. Don't walk in, I'm gonna say this. I wrote an essay on Indigo for the special JPSR issue on Black romance. It started off a whole bunch of different ways and it was all wrong. So I went back and read Indigo. And Hester and Galen told me what to say, and Hester in particular. It's just like, this is what you need to say, Margo. Okay. So just as characters will talk to romance writers, they talk to us. All right. And so I hope that I did Hester's voice in my head justice. I also wrote an essay about Forbidden for my, whenever it shows up, academic book. I'm not sure yet who's talking to me, but we'll see. I'll go back and do that.
So I just wanted to let you know, Dr. Hendricks, that both Julie and I are having some technical issues with Zoom is misbehaving on the back end. And so we apologize to the attendees, but to make things fluid, we're unable to unmute everyone. And there are some folks that had questions, and I think a question was sent to you about why is it possibly that Black men should read Black romance or see Black romance movies? That was one question. And
Okay.
another one was, how can everyone get a sample of, can that syllabus be sent to everyone present?
Okay, the idea of me doing that, and let's just call it a reading list. Hopefully we'll be able to share it. We're gonna figure out how to do that for everyone who's participated. Julie and I talked about it, and I do wanna make it available. Okay, I'm gonna do something here. I gotta switch keyboards because I'm on my iPad for notes. All right, okay. And it's all lowercase. All right, that's my academic email address. And I'll give that out to anybody because, it's my academic, it's my public base. If we can't figure out how to make it more widely available to you, if you email me, I'll send it to you, okay? Okay. So, all right, so I'm gonna go through and play with your questions right now because y'all are asking me some interesting. I'm gonna back up a little bit because there's some direct messages. This doesn't allow me to, I'm gonna go through and look at the direct messages first. Okay, first, I wanna say, there was a question about Black men reading romance. And I know on Twitter we say this, but, and someone said it just within the last week, if Black men actually read Black romances, they fully understand they're Black women, okay? And it's true. Black men are reading romances. There is, I follow several Black men reading groups, and they have book clubs. They are reading romances. I think we need to do more in our scholarship to talk to people about the romances that don't bash Black men. I think we need to stop. Oh God, this is, okay. I'm gonna do a thing on traditional, okay, so on traditional publishing, which is, traditional publishing wants interracial. And they want white romance authors writing interracial, even if they have a Black female protagonist. There's a problem when that interracial romance represents Black masculinity. Because I don't care what, if you did not grow up in the Black community and see a range of Black men that offered a spectrum of Black masculinity, then you don't have a clue. And you should not be writing Black male characters. Okay, that's my just sort of bottom line. I grew up, okay, I'm candid. My two brothers, we're both dead. We were thugs in LA. And they weren't blood, so I'm gonna say. My great uncles were business owners, some of them. Others were gangsters in the 20s and 30s. They were married, they had children, they sent their children off to college, they provided for us, everybody owned their home, they drove their cars, they had new cars every year, etc. Okay. Some of the men were physically abusive to their spouses, others were as gentle as you can imagine. And then some were highly educated, some weren't. Some were big, soft teddy bears, hearts of gold. Some pull a gun on you in a heartbeat if you dare mess with the family. Okay. They're all over the map. And if we don't see that, if Black men don't see that, why should they read romance? So I think we need to wrest back the representation of Black masculinity. I'm going to pluralize everything. Black masculinities as Black romance authors, regardless of our pronouns, to represent that spectrum. That's how we get readers, in my opinion. Okay, Black erotica. Oh yeah, I'm just gonna say, yeah, there's a difference between Black erotica and Black romance. I don't write erotica. I mean, you should see me when I'm sitting there and I'm having, I'm representing oral sex and my female character is going down on him. I write it in some of the most loveliest prose you could find. You know, I don't use euphemism. I will use pussy, dick, etc., depending on the era. But everything around it is like there. I don't just go straight to the heart of it. I do a lot of stuff. So yes, there is a difference between Black erotica and Black romance. And there's room for both. I'm a firm believer. I was brought up in a different generation, so some of that's still imprinted, but I'm getting rid of it. The one thing that Black people need to embrace and say, okay, this is my third one. Fuck you, white supremacists. We're embracing our sexuality. We're embracing our body. We're embracing our love, okay? And we're gonna write it. But there is a difference between me writing Black romance and me writing Black erotica. First, I'd have to learn, because there's a whole generic tradition, all right, attached to that. That is also different from white erotica in terms of relationships. So that was the short answer. I'm still, okay. I write about, oh, thank you for coming. Love and basketball there. Oh, the romances, what's wrong with you? You're reading romance. Oh, sorry, this is, this comes back to the why is it important for Black men to read it. And in the chats, there's a lot of suggestions about, yeah, I love Talia Hibbert's stuff, but it tends to be interracial. And so I still need to come back to this question of what constitutes Black romance. Having a Black author does not necessarily make a book a Black romance. I wrote the series that I wrote, Daughters of Syria, of which the historical is there. Every one of my heroines is a Black female of African descent. The last two books, she is Black, British, Black American. But my main characters are supernaturals and they're all white presenting, even though they have Black ancestors, except for the main male character in Fate's Consort and Fate's Promise. And that's because they're angels, but they're white presenting and they keep saying they're not white men and they're not men. But that's the running joke of their relationship. So, but I would not classify that as Black romance. And I call people out if they say that that's Black romance, because it's not. My Black romance is for your heart only. Black male, Black female, Black culture, academic, upper class, etc. The book that I'm working on now, Black Romance, Black professionals, set in a small Black town, dealing with Black, basically working class people who are running an inn and a tourist business. Okay, that's Black romance. So I do want to land hard on the distinction between Black authored interracial romances and Black authored Black romance. Okay, why is it? Okay, so I got that one. I'm scrolling through your questions, so just pardon me. Thank you. Don't worry, I'm saving this chat. Okay, there's a lot of trauma in a virtuous Ruby. Where is the line between bearing witness and trauma? Oh my God, that's such a great question. I'm defaulting to my everyday mouth. Does that line depend? Okay, here's the question. There's a lot of trauma in a virtuous Ruby. Where's the line between bearing witness and trauma porn? And does that line differ depending on who we are, what race we are? Asking as a white writer and scholar. Thank you for that question. And thank you for being brave enough to put that out there. Yes, there is a difference. And I want to say it is in the representation. The lingering on the trauma from the standpoint of either a scholar or a reader or a teacher is, in my opinion, that line. Because there is just no way you can teach about the lives of enslaved, formerly enslaved, and descendant of enslaved people in this country, in the colonies. I'm going to even go so far as to say on the continent of Africa, by Europeans, where you can ignore the traumas. It's there. I think the difference between bearing witness and painting trauma porn is the way in which it is engaged, especially within this. Trauma porn, in my opinion, are those revisionist Confederate crap people are writing under the interracial stuff, where, you know, a Black woman is the salvation of a Nazi or a KKK member, or an enslaved woman is in love with her enslaver, and or the enslaver's son, and the son doesn't work to dismantle the structure of enslavement, okay, because the son benefits from it, and he takes her off to live in the West where there is no slavery, but forgets that there's a whole lot of people remaining in enslavement that he's left on his daddy's plantation. That's trauma porn, okay? The other thing that I would say about A Virtuous Ruby is it's painful to read. People don't want to face up to the history that is represented in that book, or that's all they want to land on. Look at what happens at the end of the book, where people think, as Dr. Hughley said yesterday, people think they ran away. They didn't run away. They chose to leave, to live their lives. Trauma porn doesn't give us a choice. Bearing witness gives us a choice. And so many Black people during the period of enslavement, immediately after, and even now, continue to make choices about how to live their Black lives. That's bearing witness. Does that help? Okay. Oh, yeah, okay. I'm sorry. Let me go back and read this question. You are absolutely right. I was trying, okay. Yeah, Frank Love wrote, I write about relationships, but I do not read Black or any other kind of romance. I see movies that are about Black romance. My very favorite movie is Love and Basketball. I also enjoyed The Picture and the movie about the couple that was on the run from the police and ultimately got sold out. I forgot the name of it. Usually I see romance movies because my wife wants to, you already made a really good start, wants to see them. Is it important? Absolutely. And if so, why is it important for Black men to read Black romances or see Black romance movies? Okay, simple statement. Black women writing Black romances or directing Black romance movies are writing about the experiences that we live with the Black men in our lives. So that for me is reason enough for you to want to read Black romances, because we are writing about that. We're writing about how much we love you. We're writing about how much we respect you. We are writing about the importance of Black men in our lives on all fronts, whether as fathers, whether as brothers, whether as lovers, whether as friends, cousins, just general parts of our community. Now, the diversity, using that D word again, runs a range, because there are negativities and there are positivities and there are in-between activities. We got to live with that. We're subjects. We're sovereign subjects. No two of us are alike. So I think it's important for us to recognize that what romance does in ways that honestly, certain aspects, literary fiction, I'm just going to jump on that with quotes, literary fiction doesn't, is to give us that range. I can't tell you how many best-selling literary fiction by Black authors I've read where I just feel like if you had written this as a romance, what would it look like? Where whatever traumas that started at the beginning don't still weigh so heavily on the protagonist or the protagonist. Because I think what romance does, bottom line, is to give us hope. As a Black communities, as Black peoples, as Black women, as Black men, as Black non-binary, in every way possible. Yeah, but I think that's why Black romance has been around for centuries. I think that's always been there. I just feel that we have given over a concept, and I'm not sure why. I don't know why we've given up romance, because without it, we wouldn't exist. So I hope that answers your question. I hope that inspires you to, if you need a list, I'm gonna suggest, okay, so Zuri Day, if I were going to recommend, there's too many. I'd recommend Zuri Day, Sharon Cooper, of course, Beverly Jenkins. Lord, that woman can represent some Black men. Y'all need to just read her books. And again, across the spectrum. Yeah, I would recommend those. And folks in the chat, if you have recommendations, please, please, please throw them up there, because there are non-Black enthusiasts who want to expand their readings, expand their teachings, etc. Oh, thank you, Frederick. Oh, that would be great. And just put them up there. And if you're a non-romance reading person, but you write fiction, you know, grab some of these people who say they write fiction, talk to them, all right? Because we're enthusiastic. We read widely, and we're asking you to do the same. Okay, let me see if I can get to another question. Did that help? Right? I don't want to preach. I guess that's what I'm doing, but yeah. Yeah. Let's see. Okay. I'm looking for questions. Oh my God, you guys got, okay. Oh, Sharon Cooper, Sharon Cooper. She's great. Her series on the Jenkins, those women are kick ass. Okay, this is me in the classroom. Carpenters, painters, electricians, they take over the company. Oh yeah, Brenda Jackson. Yeah, see, there are an amazing array. The Westmoreland men are yeah, I know we're grown in here. They run the gamut. They have wealth. And I think you'll love it. Those are some older ones. I also want to think about, again, the representation, because not every Black male is a billionaire. And one of the things that I really liked about Zuri Day is she gave me a postal worker, a bus driver, and basically a fry cook. Okay. She's also written, because she got picked up by Harlequin, I think it's Desire. She's also written very wealthy Black males. But I think it's important for us, again, in our readings, in our representations, to show the gamut. All right, we can do this. It ain't out yet, it's under submission, but I've written a historical romance. Do you know how hard it is going to be to get people to believe? First of all, do you know how hard it is for people to believe that there were actual Black people in Britain, despite a person whose name I'm not going to mention writing about Black tutors as if this is brand new 2020? Hint, I've been knowing about Black tutors for 2 decades, 3 decades almost. But I've written a book that focuses on Black love at the end of the at the beginning of the 17th century. All right. I am waiting for the backlash when it comes, because if a traditional publisher doesn't pick it up, I'll publish it myself. Do I have the historical evidence? Oh, heck yeah. The men in one of them is Alpha, because he's Galen. The other one is wealthy and insecure, because he understands the class dynamics. One is a foreigner, one isn't, you know? So I think it's important to display the gamut of Black maleness, if I can use that term. Question, you recommended removing relatability, empathy, sympathy, etc. from the conversation in the classroom. Is there a way to interrogate these ideas in the classroom? Talk about what's at stake if we only need to relate? Yes, that's my answer. There's a way. It's hard. It's very hard. Again, in romance, 2 years ago, we had to deal with nice white ladies saying they couldn't relate to a book because the woman was an astrophysicist and she was Black. we have people who say, well, I just don't know any Black billionaires because the only ones you know are Elon Musk, Bill Gates, Jeff, Bezos, and Steve Jobs, who's dead but still front and center in Apple. So the presumptions that you deal with in terms of relatability, and I'm gonna talk about that one first, and then I'll talk about the others, because I think once I said it, I probably needed to qualify it, but relatability needs to not be on the table. And I think you need to be honest, because white folks will never relate to us. Latinx can relate on some levels, but not on others. Asians can relate on some levels, but not on others. Native peoples can relate on more levels than Asians and Latinx, given the genocidal tendencies of white supremacy on both Black bodies and Native bodies. But there's some areas of difference, especially now with white presenting natives. All right. So relatability is deeply problematic, and I think we need to take it off the table. We don't need you to relate, to read the story, to appreciate it, to learn from it, to understand it. We don't need you to relate. We need you to read. And there's a difference between reading and relating, okay? So I think that would be my point on relatability. Empathy and sympathy, I would probably defer those maybe to like the end of a discussion about a specific book if it's required. Because with empathy and sympathy, you're asking your non-Black readers to stay in their position of white centricity. I make words up as I go along. I'm sure somebody probably created this. So if you haven't heard of it, that's probably me and my weirdness. But I think removing these terms decenters whiteness, because white readers automatically think, even if they're not conscious of it, that when they pick up a book written by a Black author about Black people, set in the Black community, dealing with Black love and a Black romantic romance relationship, that their gaze is the one that they operate from. It's hard to deconstruct the white gaze. It is very hard. I spent years trying, and sometimes you don't fully do it. But if you get your readers to be aware, that's what they're doing. By silencing some of the terminology that we use, then maybe you can come back to the terminology and talk about why they're problematic and how can we maybe redefine them in ways that allow the reader to re-embrace them. I hope that was an answer.
Dr. Hendricks, I just wanted
yes,
to let folks know that we are 2 minutes out before the end of the program. Just wanted to put that time mark out there. So
Jesus, I talked all this time. Okay.
It was all very good stuff.
Okay, I'm just kind of scrolling through this. Oh, okay. Let me do the issue of rhetoric. I know. Thank you, Andrea. Okay, so when I think about rhetoric, I'm an early person. I'm a Renaissance girl. Seriously in the Renaissance, 16th, 17th century stuff. And rhetoric is really, really important to the way in which you use language. And rhetoric is how you get people to see visually, imaginatively, what it is that you want them to see. So when I use the term rhetoric, I am using it as the way in which we use language, the way in which language can envision an imagined world, and the way in which language persuades. Because everything that I've been doing for the last 2 hours is rhetorical, it's rhetoric. I know how to use language to move you this way, I know how to language that way, and I know how to use language to move those hard-ass white people in my field a half a step forward. And that's what I mean by the use of rhetoric. And I pose that because, again, I was reading Katrina's Layover, and it was such an amazingly, beautifully written rhetorical study of the use of rhetoric, in my opinion. I'm gonna have to write this up. God, I got too much work to do. That's it. I'm sorry, Andrew. I have to think about it, but I think about language in all its various permutations, and being rhetorical is one of them. Okay, I'm gonna see if there's one last.
Are you able to hear me?
Question.
Are you able to hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Don't you dare cut me off. I'm gonna ask one last question.
All right, I'm trying to hold on. This internet.
Okay,
is
you
giving
just
trouble.
hang in there.
All right.
If not, I'll shut it down for you.
All
honey.
right, thank you.
I got
and thanks,
your back.
everybody.
You know that. Okay, thank you, everyone. And just in case Julie gets snatched away from us, we're going to thank DePaul University. We're going to thank the Center for Black and African Diaspora. Did I get it right?
Center for Black Diaspora.
Center for Black Diaspora. And I'm going to bow gracefully out. I know that you guys have questions. You can email me because you got my email address. I am at ElysabethGrace.com. I write as Elysabeth Grace. I will keep writing. And hopefully if you read them, you like them. If you don't, it's okay. Just don't at the author. Just say you hated the book and move on, because I don't read reviews. Thank you all so much for showing me love.